To need BeGoggyWebStuff.com. Killer sperm, blue and humpback. These are some of the whales of Galway Bay. Come see these beautiful, intelligent creatures hire Bigoggy Webstuff for all of their academic projects. That thing they do with the tail, that's them dancing in happiness at another successful project by Bigoggy Webstuff. You're not going to need a bigger budget. You're going to need BigoggyWebstuff.com.
Okay, I'm this way slightly now. Am I still in your shop? Hello, live stream people. The room is just beginning to kind of fill up, and we're just about to start. So welcome. Yes, I'm ready.
Ready? Okay. Your mic turn on.
Yeah.
Okay, good morning everyone. We're going to start. My name is Brian Call. I'm the chair for the session. I'm from IT Sligo. My colleague Gavin Clinch couldn't make it this morning, so he apologises. So if you actually just came here to see the chair, you will be disappointed. So our first speaker this morning is Dave White from the University of the Arts, London. And he's going to talk about what it takes, as you can see there, to establish openness as an institutional value. And his colleague, Kate, who is logging in online. I don't know, are we streaming? Maybe I shouldn't say. There was a visa issue, but that hasn't happened yet. So she couldn't make it today. So I'll hand back to Dave.
Hi, thank you. Yes, this follows on from Kate's keynote. So obviously, yeah, I'm Dave White from University Arts London. Kate Lindsay from the University College of Estate Management couldn't be here today, but this is very much just kind of co-production, so I'm going to speak to her parts of it. If you're interested in those elements of the talk, then do go to her blog and get in touch with her, because she's doing great work there. This really kind of comes off the back of Kate's keynote. I'm gonna do this a lot to keep the guy on the camera busy. Okay, hello people online. Because it was that idea of openness kind of revealing itself in our institutions, and that's very much what this is about, is how do we bring openness in from the peripheries, if you like. And that's the track that we're working in, which is bringing open in from the periphery. And whilst my institution and Kate's institution are very different, we're both trying to do that in slightly different ways, okay? Now, what I'm going to ask you to do, because this is like an open space session, is I'm going to ask you to go to that link there, tinyurl.com, OER19 culture. It would have been OER19, but somebody had already taken that, which wasn't a surprise, really. There's a Google Doc on the end of that, and I'm going to ask you, while I'm sort of talking, to respond to this question in that document, okay? So I'm going to show you the question now. If somebody could tweet that URL, I'd be very grateful, okay? It will be on the next slide, don't panic. See, it's still there, it's just slightly less clear. So this is the question I'd like you to consider, because in a way it's the question that myself and Kate are considering and are in the process of considering, which is, what are the key factors in moving your institution towards a culture of openness? And there are just some rules in terms of responding to that question, not to make it difficult, just to give it a kind of a frame. You can talk to important people. You are sat at the important people table. I thought it was really interesting, Kate, talking about the expanded university and the system. You know, the system is still people as well, so you're at that table, okay, if you want to be. You can make policy, you can change process, you can take risks, but you don't have magic money, okay? So the idea there is you're not expanding the expanded university even more. Your response to the question has to be ways of incorporating openness into existing practice, if you like. Certainly at my institution, the answer to most things is we should get together and talk about this more. And that's expensive. And so I'm asking you to think about ways that it could come in from the periphery, if you like. So I'm going to go to that Google Doc about halfway through the session for a discussion. So please do put something in it, otherwise that'll be awkward. I think you probably are, which is why everybody's super focused. That's good. I'm going to let you get on with that. Okay, so just some background. So myself and Kate have done quite a lot of open type stuff over the years. This is a good example from Kate where she ran this project that gathered, like if you like, primary and social documentation that people had in their attics and in bottom drawers and stuff like that around World War I, and that was, they got 700,000 bits of stuff from people all over the UK, put that online, lots of Creative Commons licensing, so huge, open, very connected project. An example from me, I mean, a few years ago I did Pi Day Live, which had, I think, about 2,000 school children from 27 different countries all logging in at the same time. And then this project here, which I did recently with Bon Stewart, which was a series of completely open online seminars around the subject of teaching complexity. And this is one of the kind of live slides that's part of that. But I think what's interesting about both of those is whilst they're excellent projects, in some senses they're on the periphery. Because certainly, I've never had anybody at my institution say, how come you aren't doing more open seminars? You know, if those projects hadn't existed, then there wouldn't necessarily have been anybody hunting us down to say, where's that project, if you see what I mean. So this is University College of Estate Management. This is Kate's institution where she's a senior learning designer. And it's useful to know that they're a fully online institution. They've obviously got a kind of industry focus because of the nature of the institution. A lot of part-time students working. They're very flexible in terms of who they accept, so they're open in that sense. and they're also flexible in terms of if people want to sort of back off from their education and then get back into it, okay? And I think it's fair to say that up until now, obviously they're online, but their model, if you like, their educational model was fairly correspondence-y in essence. And so Kate's looking to refresh that with a new educational framework. So this, obviously, in a session that's half an hour long, I can't go through this in detail. So you can visit her blog to find out more about that. But I think it's an interesting situation because obviously if you've got a fully online institution, then you can sort of control or frame the way that curriculum is designed. And in terms of bringing openness in from the periphery and establishing it as an institutional value, this bit of the diagram here, that sort of area there, is where there are going to be sort of open or learning designs that have inherent open practice in them. So that's one way, that's a kind of one way that you can start to bring it in terms of curriculum design. Now for me, that's a bit tricky because I come from a big arts university, 20,000 students, and I can't control how curriculum is designed, not to that extent, if you like. So talking with Catherine Cronin about this actually, I was encouraged to go in the direction of trying to establish some open, I don't know if you'd call them principles or if you'd call them values, at the center of the university, if you like. And so ran a couple of workshops with staff to sort of develop these values and to really kind of condense them down. So you can see in terms of openness, we're talking about things that sort of go beyond the making content open. This is more fundamental than that in some senses. And the reason that I wanted to do this was because it struck me that the staff at the university, they didn't know what the university thought about open practice, if I can use that frame, that sort of phrasing. And so I wanted to kind of reveal, or at least maybe nudge the university in a certain direction and say, well, actually, no, we think openness is good and we think it looks like this, okay? And that might lead to two things. One would be that the people that are already working in open ways would actually reveal that they were working in open ways. One of the ironies I find about this form of practice is that the teaching practitioners who work in open, in the character of open, if you like, quite often try and do it under the radar because they're worried that the institution will say that they're not allowed to do it, okay? So I'm trying to create a space where they could say, oh, actually, I'm already doing some of this, let's talk about it. And then the other thing is that it would encourage people to head in this direction. So that's where we've got to with those. I can't say I've been incredibly successful with that up to this point. I talked about it as part of a committee paper, and it wasn't universally well received, and I can totally see why. I think one of the reasons was because of the way I presented it, which wasn't excellent. I think people were like, well, we've got to do all of this, and we've got to be open. It's like, it just seemed like another thing to have to do, which is, in a way, was part of the genesis of this session, which is, how do you make it part of the fabric of the institution rather than yet another thing that you have to do on top of everything else? So I just want to focus on the connects to diversity of voices just for a second, and then we'll come back round to that document and have a bit of a discussion, I hope. This was the trickiest one and the most interesting one. That phrasing was going to be facilitates or invites at one point, and I ended up with connects for this reason, okay? And I think that this has come up, but it's really important to me that openness doesn't become, hey, we're going to invite you into our club. But actually, openness is more about connecting different voices and the university kind of being a site of exchange for those voices. Along these lines here. And I like the idea of complexity. I'm not sure to what extent the students like the idea of complexity, but I think that's an interesting discussion. Okay. So what suddenly began to intrigue me about this, and in discussing this with Kate to put the session together, is that I realized that one of the main motivations one of the main institutional motivations to support open practice, directly, was as a kind of performance of surplus, right? So this is a really useful blog post from Richard Hall, where he's describing it's a useful quote in terms of what I'm saying surplus is. Richard puts it much better. And it reminded me of this. Has anybody ever seen this documentary from 1974? I think in the UK it used to be part of a schools thing. The undergraduate degree that I did when I was an undergraduate had an anthropology aspect to it. And we watched this documentary which was about Onka's Big Mocker. And it suddenly reminded me, or at least it resonated with me in terms of how institutions sometimes respond to openness in slightly dangerous ways, which is, look at us, we've got the capacity and the confidence and the power and the wealth that allows us to give you this open stuff, okay? So instead of it being about connecting a diversity of voices, that's not the intention, that's the problem, is perhaps the intention comes as a kind of performance of surplus or of power, if you like. And what happens in Onka's Big Mocker, I'm using this in a sort of Claude Lévi-Strauss way, which is sometimes it's useful to look at other cultures because they hold up a mirror to your own. So when thinking about this, I was thinking about our culture as institutions rather than this directly. But a mocker is this form of exchange in Papua New Guinea, whereby big men give bunches of gifts to each other, and you have to give back the same amount of gifts to repay the debt. But if you want to look like a really big man, you give significantly more than what you've been given, because that confers status on you, okay? And so this sentence, now that I've given you all these things, I've knocked you down by giving so much. I started to worry that was an institutional motivation for openness, okay? Okay, let's go back to the document.
A little bit of juggling. Oh, there's tons in there.
Right, that's a good thing. I sounded like that was a bad thing, but I was just suddenly mildly daunted because it's like a half an hour session, and, oh, that's good, we're halfway through, excellent. So, I like the way that there's a lot of other thoughts in there. I think that's very promising. Would anybody like to speak to any of the points that they put in? Anybody like to explain what they put in? Somebody brave. Yeah, be brave, Martin.
So I put the one about, sorry, thank you, Dave. I put the about linking to things that matter to the system, but I'm not sure about this, okay? And I think it links to something that Kate was saying in her presentation about kind of academic labour and things. So I think, in some ways, in order for things to count, we have to count them, right? Yeah, okay. But then once you start counting things, you pretty much kill any joy or niceness about them, So do you fight the counting? So do you kind of play the game and say, like, the point about openness is that you can make a good case in the ref, it will increase your citations, it's a good way to improve student retention, or it's a marketing factor. You can play the game, the kind of, for want of a better phrase, the neoliberal game, But is that a good thing to do, or is that a bad thing? Should you be setting up an alternative narrative to that? And I don't have an answer to that, but I think if you just want to kind of make it work in an institution, then selling it to them on the things that matter to them is one way to do that. But I don't know whether that's a bad thing to do.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I found myself, when trying to promote openness in principle, using some of that language, and so I think it's important. I personally don't have a problem using that language knowingly, if you like, and using it as a kind of shell to bring some healthy practices in. but that's definitely a dangerous business. And for me, there's this interesting tension between network and hierarchy. So, institutions are hierarchical and they measure things in that sense, but actually most open practice is distinctly kind of networked in character. And so bringing in network practices from the periphery into the institution, which is hierarchical, is that inevitably going to kill them on the way in? Yeah? So I genuinely think that's a difficult question. For me, it's about trying to reframe what we think value is, if you like. But that's a really big question. Anybody else want to speak to the document? Yeah. Can you do some? I could run with the mic, but I feel like I have to stay on. Hopefully, if you're watching on the live stream, then you've also had a chance to contribute to the document. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look through this and have a good old think about it, probably post about it afterwards. So all of this work will go somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I put in the global south, there is still lack of some sort of awareness, and there is still need to be increase in investment in ICT infrastructures. So these has to be in place for the culture of open to be, for most institutions in the global south to be really engaged in the culture of open.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point. And to be honest, it wasn't that what you've made me realize a bunch of assumptions I made there, which is I think that, for example, in my institution, all of that infrastructure is there. So that gives me the opportunity to talk about values. But I think that's a point well made, that actually there are other locations whereby things just haven't quite been plugged in yet, and that infrastructure isn't there. And perhaps that amplifies the danger of that openness as a performance of surplus problem. That actually being structurally in a position where you can be open is actually a privileged position. And that was something that I wanted to say about myself and Kate's roles as well, is that I'm in a permanent contract, and the only reason I could run those teaching complexity seminar series is, one, because I'm in a permanent contract, and two, because I don't have a full teaching load. So actually, I can do open things in a very nice way, but in a way that's just emblematic of my privileged position. Okay, so thank you for that. That's a useful reminder to me of some assumptions I've made about where I started with that. Should I take another one? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Dave. Can I give a plug for our panel at 5 o'clock this afternoon as well?
Go on, why not?
Some of those things. So
yeah.
We're talking about Jane Secker's module on digital literacies and open practice, but it made me think. So I'm Chris Morrison at the University of Kent. I put down asking enterprise team, those responsible for exploiting IP to create open resources and consider their own practice. And again, this may be something I'm trying to do at Kent, talk to the people who own the intellectual property policy, who say the university owns everything and are very concerned about not opening the floodgates. So I'm trying to engage them in that conversation, because teachers will come to me and say, or lecturers, can we make open stuff? And I can say, well, I could say, yes, I think it's a good idea, but we don't have a policy and we don't have a position on it. And I think we're quite a conservative, traditional, hierarchical institution. So it's just trying, I don't know if it's going to work, to have that networked idea within the institution to try to create those connections that somehow might help influence that kind of, or override the hierarchy that wants to own and control things and come up with something. I don't know whether you have experience of that actually having worked anywhere, or whether that sounds a bit like a pipe dream.
No, I mean, I'm not sure that I can respond to that directly, but I think what you're talking about, I think there's a thing, I mean, maybe this comes back to Martin's point as well, is that what you can do with institutional structures is use them to create a space for certain types of practice, which is why I'm interested in those sort of open values. So whilst the culture of the institution might not really understand openness and what its benefits are, and whilst you probably don't want to go down the route, as Martin says, of describing the benefits in a way that perpetuates the system that you're trying to do something about, I do think that you can do things like have policies around IP and policies that perhaps support community practice type, structures that aren't directly, they're not directly supporting openness, but what they're doing is they're kind of cutting a space in the institution for that practice to then emerge, and certainly for the practice to be acknowledged as a thing. Because I think that's sometimes, the starting point is what does it take to get to help my institution acknowledge that openness is a valid practice, even if what makes it valid doesn't directly play to the value structures of the institution directly, if you like. It's a bit of a knotty response, but okay. Yeah.
Just as you were talking there, I think, again, for me, in terms of open practice, just thinking about privilege and position, but actually one of the things that I find about doing things openly, just doing something openly, is actually almost a way to subvert the system as well. And I think you sometimes need that ground up kind of approach as well to get that buy-in, because I know in my own institution, although we've got policies and we do have things, that sometimes you just have to keep doing things to remind people. So again, just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And in a way, I think you need both. I mean, one of the reasons we put on the teaching complexity was because it was like a show, not tell. It's actually, openness is a really difficult thing to describe, but it's a relatively easy thing to show people. So finding elegant ways of communicating something that you've actually done in the language of the institution is quite useful. Otherwise, it becomes very hypothetical, doesn't it? Okay, I'm going to move on just because of time.
I say just because of time. Obviously, time's quite a fundamental thing for all of us.
But as I say, thank you for engaging in the Google Doc. Myself and Kate will look at all of that and respond to it. I like fighting its neoliberal agenda, ! By the way, that's nice and crisp. I can't move on
In a PowerPoint, unless I've actually got it up on screen. So let's do that.
Okay, so in terms of myself and Kate, 5 minutes, that's about right. I love it when that happens. Okay, so these are some of our responses to that question, if you like. At UAL, University Arts London, we're going to put together some signature digital learning designs and some of those will inherently have open practice in them. And what's important about those is we're going to ask undergraduate courses to incorporate them into their curriculum, but not as a bolt-on, as switching out practice that they're doing now, if you like. So really, a really simple example, you do 5 lectures as part of your course. Why not do 2 of them online in something like Blackboard Collaborate or something along those lines? So actually really quite straightforward things, but the important thing for me is that they're not additional practice, okay? And also, just a debate around openness, I realized when I was talking about the open values at the committee I was at, that it is actually still quite new to some people as an idea, as a principle. So I've got the Director of Libraries and Student Services, the Dean of Students and Widening Participation, and the Director of Knowledge Exchange. We're all going to get together and put together a kind of convene an institutional debate just to raise the profile and visibility of it. That's kind of breaking my question a little bit because that is sort of additional. And as I say, Kate's got this new educational framework which is going to be kind of woven into the institution. And also, it responds to some new graduate attributes that they've got. And the graduate attributes obviously have things like you're going to be an authentic practitioner in your field and stuff about being connected and networked. So you can respond to that as well as a way of making sure that openness isn't peripheral. So I just want to end on this thought, really, just to try and bring it together. And this comes off the back of the sort of Onka's Big Mocha documentary. And that principle of openness, or trying to avoid the institutional response to openness being a demonstration of surplus, is to, and to me it came down to this, which is a very kind of anthropological sort of statement, is to try and ensure, as we bring openness in from the periphery, that it's based on reciprocity and not redistribution, okay? I think that works as an idea. So that's where that value that I had in the list, you know, connects a diversity of voices. That's kind of what that means, is that it becomes more about more about gifts, more about connection, and less about let's marketize openness, which in some ways I think was how do we avoid doing that was the heart of our discussion we just had. So that's just what I want to leave you with. Openness is reciprocity, not redistribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I think we have about a minute for any final questions before we move on to the next talk.
Did I actually finish before the end?
Yeah, you get
that's incredible.
You get a star. No, okay.
No, that's good. That was because it was so perfectly formatted, yeah.
Perfectly timed. Excellent. Well done. Okay, in the interest of timekeeping, because we know there are other sessions after this, so while we're setting up. So this next talk is unpacking the geopolitics of open for the strategic development of higher education institutions and communities. What is the university for? Before I introduce the speakers, just a little anecdote that if you were in at Sharon Flynn's talk today, she said she recommends everyone goes to a talk that they wouldn't normally choose. Well, this is my one. So no disrespect.
No, you always a pint of stout for that one. I think that's got to be there.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to it.
Good.
I'd like to introduce Sheila McNeil from Glasgow Caledonian, and also the chair of ALT, and Bill Johnson, recently retired from University of Strathclyde, and I believe online is Keith Smythe. Did I say that right? And he's a co-author, but not here today. So I'll hand back.
So thank you for coming to this. Just to say that is the title, but because this session has been cut down to half an hour, we're not actually going to do that, so don't worry. You've come to the right session. We might just do a quick sound check with Keith. Can we do that, Martin, just to see if we're online? We're going to do all sorts of things today that might go horribly wrong, so we're going to try and bring in Keith Smythe from UHI, and hopefully he has a group of people there in UHI as well, because we're going to have a bit of collaboration, so you will all be working with people. So if you haven't met someone, as Kate suggested, or Sharon suggested, if you haven't spoken to someone that you don't know, this will be a perfect opportunity for you to do in this session. We might have to get you to squish in and work together as well. But I think are we working with Keith? Yeah? Okay, that's great. So we will be handing over to Keith at some point as well. But yeah, let me just move the slide here. So yeah, because we've only got half an hour. This is basically what we're doing today. So I'm going to hand over to Bill to give you a bit more of an explanation.
You go, and I'll use that, and you can fit the hand, make sure. Okay, although there's three of us, different kinds of people, backgrounds, etc., we've tried to work over the pitch. We've been working together as a thought collective, as we call ourselves. And in the spirit of that, we use this little phrase here, let our numbers be unlimited, which is a kind of pastiche on the work of a group from the past called the London Corresponding Society. And that was formed in 1792 in a pub by a guy called Thomas Hardy, who originated in Stirlingshire in Scotland and then went down to London to make his fortune. And he got involved with other people in looking at the hardness of the times and the need to improve the position of the ordinary working man, as the phrase was in those days. But they also had a bigger ambition, and that was a very radical ambition of the time, which was to get political representation for ordinary people, to get the franchise extended. And life being life, this did not go unnoticed by the authorities, and they were all had up for high treason, which could have got them hung, drawn and quartered, but they had a good lawyer and managed to get off. And it's resonated to me down the centuries, the idea of let our numbers be unlimited, which is kind of a spin on one of the rules of the corresponding society. They use letters, they sent letters to other societies in different parts of England, and in some ways there's almost a kind of historical echo of what we're trying to do with the internet, and so on and so forth. So that's our first thing, I guess, is our idea of open and openness for today, anyway, until we change our minds later on, is the idea that the numbers of people involved should be unlimited, and that perhaps there should be a radical edge to it. It shouldn't simply all be about teaching people how to be capitalists or whatever. There should be a challenge there. So that's our own generative theme, if you like, open as challenge.
So just to explain what we're going to do today, we're giving you the introduction, and then we're going to do some group discussions with you. This work is based on a book that Bill, Keith and I have recently published called Conceptualizing the Digital University, which we'll talk a bit about later. One of the things that we have been impressed by in that, I think that's someone else just joining our collaborate room as well, is critical pedagogy, and it was lovely to see the quotes from Giroux in Kate's session this morning, because we've tried to put hope into our work, and we have been actually trying to do some of the things that Kate suggested in terms of reimagining and giving an alternative vision to how universities can develop. So we're going to try and, in the spirit of critical pedagogy, what we're going to try and do is have a digitally distributed culture circle, which may or may not work. So exciting times, guys, but we'll
give it a try. Okay, so some of our ideas and concepts are captured on that slide. There's a lot more in the book. But a few things to pull out. What is a university for was one of the things that we organised a lot of our ideas around and a lot of our work around. What's it actually for? Is it for the benefit of the rich and powerful? Or is it actually for the benefit of the vast majority of people who need an education, who need to meet other people for learning purposes? So we're much influenced, obviously, by Stefan Collini, who writes very cleverly and articulately about that question, what's a university for? And that's a thing that we focused on. And one of our poll points, and you can see it there, and it's kind of big in blue, is a challenge in neoliberalism. Somebody in Dave's session threw that up, challenge the neoliberal agenda, and quite right too, because if you don't, you'll end up in a precarious contract if you're not already on one. That's one of the sharp points of the neoliberalism word, which used to be seen as academic jargon a few years ago, but I think more and more people are starting to say, well, that's that precarious employment, isn't it? So that's telling students that the whole point of being a student and getting a degree is you can earn a better graduate salary, and you really ought to use a special information system to find out which university to go to in order to get the best graduate salary later on. What that does for nurses is kind of beyond me, because the labour market for nursing doesn't really operate quite the way that the theorists of neoliberal higher education would have you believe. So a couple of our values there, the idea of things being discursive, reflective, dialogic. Again, I would think meat and drink to your good selves, so say a bit more about that. That, I guess, tries to sum up one of our key ideas, that we work with people and pedagogy, and not simply technology, important as it is, and definitely as a critique of managerialism, which you could say is it's the sharp end of the neoliberal approach to higher education in universities, and it's been there growing steadily and developing its power and breadth and span for some decades now. I'm retired, but I talk occasionally to old colleagues and ask them what it's like now, and they say it's pretty much the way it was when you left, only worse. And that's not a good message to be getting back from your colleagues.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have time really to explain this in full, but one of the, I suppose, part of our work, and we've presented at OER, I think a couple of times now, certainly at OER 16, when we were just starting this work, we started with what we called a conceptual matrix. Was basically there was 4 elements there as a way to discuss this question of what is a university for, and we tried to look at it in a slightly different way in terms of not doing some of the things that Kate was talking about in terms of, just having, I suppose, data and spreadsheets and things, but talking about what people actually did in a university. So we had notions of participation, of information literacy, of curriculum and course design, and of the learning environment, but the learning environment being the physical and the digital spaces that all our work takes place in. And we've expanded this through the book, and again, we can't explain this in the limited time that we've got. But what we've very much seen now, what we would like to propose is to think about, when we're thinking about organisational development or reimagining a university or developing a university, that academic development should be at the heart of that process as well, and it should be about people, and that would be a way to engage and have the discussions and challenge some of the things that were coming through, particularly in Kate's inspiring talk this morning, but as a way to focus back on people and what's actually happening in the institution. So we can then look at open education and open educational practice as a really, really powerful way to do that. And we've been talking about praxis and getting people to understand what that actually means. And again, using critical pedagogy to allow people to contextualize where they are and actually to understand their place within the university, whether you're a student or a staff member, and the wider political situation that we are all living in. And again, what we're hoping, although we have written very much from our context, which is in the UK, we're hoping that this critical lens would allow people from other parts of the world to be able to have an engaged conversation as well. And then maybe we could have a different way of sharing our experiences, but doing that more openly as well. So we're going to bring in Keith now. So one of the instantiations of this matrix is what we're calling the digitally distributed curriculum. And if Keith is there, and if we can hear Keith, Keith is maybe going to talk through this. Can we get Keith? Do I have to swap over? Oh, yeah, Martin to the rescue.
If Keith's not there, we'll have to talk to this diagram, so hopefully he's there.
He just tweeted that he wasn't, that he got lost.
Oh dear.
All right, we're reconnecting. Oh no!
He's not there.
It was all working so well.
I don't suppose Keith tweeted a new link.
That's it. Oh, that looks better.
Oh, looks a wee bit better.
Oh,
can you hear me?
Yes.
We can. Good man.
Yes, we can. Great.
Hello?
Hi, Keith, can you hear us?
Yes,
Excellent.
Should we sit down?
Okay, Keith, over to you. Could you explain the digitally distributed curriculum?
I really do apologize. I was in the private room, but I'm probably not staying always, so I'm back in now, so thank you. So following from what Sheila and Bill were saying, in terms of how we try to instantiate some of the thinking, and it chimes with some of the previous sessions as well that David White, we're very much looking at values around reciprocity and praxis.
I think we've lost sound again.
Sorry, I don't know if you're picking me up. All kinds of things have been going on at this end. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay, sorry, there seems to be a connection problem. In terms of how we've instantiated some of this in relation to this concept of digitally distributed curriculum, we're kind of really looking at the notion of the digital and digital space as a way to expand and extend higher education and our universities as a public good, and to co-locate both our universities and the curriculum and learning and the outcomes of learning within the wider communities where we sit. So in relation to digitally distributed curriculum, we've conceptualised this as involving three distinct elements, if you like. One of the values that we think underpin working in this way, and this type of open reciprocal practice and co-location for university. So values are really around praxis, challenging, changing things within our societies and communities communities need to be challenged and changed. Public pedagogy, as a means of thinking about the location and co-location of learning beyond the walls and silos of the institution itself. And then participation, which is really kind of something that flows across the rest of how we conceptualise the digitally distributed curriculum. From values, we move into enabling dimensions. These enabling dimensions are dimensions of practice, if you like, that allow us to take those values and turn them into something tangible. So the dimensions of enabling dimensions that we identified include open scholarship, co-production, philosophy, and co-location, both of spaces, both of formal and informal learning communities, and also the co-location of the university within and alongside and through public third spaces. And something that's very important to us, and we really conceptualise this, is to not try to not fall into the trap of conflating open with just open online. So you see in relation to philosophy, we're talking about open online engagement, open campus engagement, and also open in the community. A third element to the digitally distributed curriculum is around how it's instantiated and how it's enacted. So these are really the practical things in terms of our practice, curriculum design, how we capture outcomes of learning and shape them. So without going into all of this in detail, co-production, negotiation and agency, creation, sustainable pedagogical practice. In terms of open scholarship, we're talking about coursework and knowledge is produced as digital artifacts and shared that involves collaborative projects. And student digital scholarship, which digital scholars and contribute to public opportunities. And then in relation to co-location, which we talked about, the leading statement is that it's going to be learning spaces, but also how they relate to self-select digital learning spaces. And as I mentioned, that whole access to intersection between formal spaces, digital spaces, and the level of public spaces within our communities.
Great, thanks, Keith. So hopefully you got that. But what we would like you to do now, I tweeted out a link to a Padlet wall. And what we'd like you to do is thinking about these, I'll go back to, that's the URL, but I tweeted it out and we can get that from this, oh, I'm in the wrong one. Hopefully, what we'd like you to do is look at these, the enabling dimensions of open scholarship, co-location, porosity, and co-location. And we'd like you to, in groups, maybe think about how your work actually, if your work includes any of that. And we've put some suggestions of enabling factors, but maybe if you have any instantiations of that, you could share that as well. Sorry, I'll just get that slide up properly. Why is it you can never use one of these keyboard, like trackpad mice when you're presenting something? But basically, we want you to look at the, oh, it's not working at all. I'm going to get technical fail here with this. Sorry, Martin, do you have mine? But we'd like you in your groups to actually look at that, based on that diagram, to have a conversation about these values and see if they would work in your context. I don't feel so bad because Martin Hoxie's had to plug in a mouse, so I don't feel a complete failure now.
It's over here.
So that's the Padlet wall. I'll give people a moment to maybe look at that and get that. We'll go back to that, but possibly more important to look at that diagram. So looking at open scholarship, co-location, porosity, and co-production, you might just want to take one of those elements. In the diagram, we've got some instantiations and some suggestions of things that we think kind of are examples of practice in that area. But we'd be really interested to see if you think that you know that's part of your practice, if you do something else in these areas. And also I think from different parts of the world, how can we actually have more porosity between, different cultures and different countries? And thinking about some of the issues of privilege and ownership and control, how can we do that? And thinking about notions of third spaces, so how we in education work with different parts of society as well. So it might be a bit complicated, it might not work, but we just want you to share what you what you do. So I'll go back to the Padlet link, but we'll put this back up as well, so you can keep that in mind. If you have any questions, of course, do ask us, but please, we just want you to have a discussion as much as you can about that, and then we'll watch the Padlet wall grow as you add.
Well, happy that you've got the link. You're okay with that?
Okay.
Ready to go?
Okay.
Okay. Just shove it back to the main slide.
There you go.
Okay, over to you. We'll give you a shout about 5 minutes from the end, and perhaps have some live discussion as well. Just and I'll help you with the time. Thank you. Off you go. Yep. I think we just went through everything that was on our script. Right, folks, time is, as always, against us. We're going to bring up the Padlets and see what you did. Right, can we get you to focus a wee bit for just a few minutes? We've got about 5 minutes or so less. I think no, it doesn't look like it.
Great. Well, as Bill says, it's great to see everything coming through on the Padlet wall, and we will share this, and we are going to follow up on this. But I don't know, is there anyone? Is there anyone that would like to make a comment about anything just now, or how useful you find it? It seemed to certainly generate quite a lot of discussion in the room. You might just have been talking about other things, though. I don't know. Hopefully, you were talking about this. But I think that's kind of validating what we were doing. I think it's interesting seeing things coming in about working with students, and I think that's absolutely critical and crucial, how we do that. And Scott and I were just having a discussion about the confidence it takes to be an open practitioner within your institution. And we were just talking about privilege, and I probably am in a position where I have got the privilege of just saying, just be open, because I've been able to develop my own open practice over many years. And at some points, I kind of think, well, I'm just going to do it anyway. I have a great phrase from a colleague who says, proceed until apprehended. And in dark times, you actually have to do that. Sometimes you just have to do things and see how it goes. But instilling that confidence to other colleagues and actually being able to have a discussion so people can actually not feel scared about doing something, but actually feel liberated by making a resource open. And as Kate pointed out, to create something, you do need support to do that. But we have to find creative ways and understand our own practice to be able to do that. And we need to be able to support staff and students to be able to do that. I think we miss out a huge amount in terms of what our students can do, particularly around co-production and co-location. And I think notions of expanding what a university is for, and again, fighting back against that kind of spreadsheet numbers, the students are just the data. The students are people, the students are our future, so we really want them to be creating and sharing as much as we can.
That's a quick thing. One of the kind of key words for us was porosity. And part of the reason for that was a couple of years back at the University of Highlands and Islands in Inverness. We had a couple of days on the idea of the porous university. And it got a lot of discussion going. And for me, anyway, it seemed to be a helpful word for destabilising and unfreezing often quite tightly structured notions of what are the boundaries, what are the openings so that people can get in. And it's obviously much easier from a corporate management point of view to restrict porosity, I would say, and try to keep everything on the basis of somebody's signed a form that says they want to come here. Or some such thing. So I think, just throw it out to you, there's obviously stuff coming up there, and it's good, the idea of the wider public. If you think back to the example we gave of Thomas Hardy and his buddies in the pub, that's actually, from our experience, very close to concepts like the Ragged University that's on the go in Scotland, and we hope to do more work with the folk who are involved with that. And that was just ordinary guys sitting about the pub, something that was important to them, which was getting political recognition, and things went from there. So that idea of porosity, I think, is one we would throw out into the ether, and perhaps see if people have other ideas about it later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, cultural porosity, what does that actually mean between different countries, between the languages that we use, between the cultural values that we share, the assumptions that we make about the resources that we share, where we share them, expectations of how people can access them as well. I think we need to have more conversations about that, and we need to be enabling our staff and students to have the space to have these conversations as well. Anyone wants to, any comments
from
from the last couple of minutes? Well, we will follow up.
There's
Oh, sorry.
a lady up there.
Just a small point, thinking of how many of us are working undercover, if you like. You know, how do we... Victor Bergen said this when restructuring reared its head in arts and humanities, 2009-10. How do you work within the institution, which feeds us and some of us roofs over our head. But the students are in the same position. Many of them are interested in this. Many of my students talk about this. However, they're paying for a brand. They're working nights, some of them, to pay for that. Some are privileged, but many are not. And so they're in that catch-22 of they can't damage what they're paying for in the hope there may be some employment afterwards.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. But I think certainly very positive experiences I hear from students is when they can do something that then they can take outside the institution. And a lot of the work that we get our students to do, there's a, you know, like the holes in our VLE walls, it's bounded, it's hidden, so they can't take it with them, so they can't use that experience as, you know, to help their employability chances as well. And again, I think it goes back to confidence of staff being able to design curriculum and design assignments and activities that allow students those opportunities as well. And I think sometimes, yes, there is that fear because we do think, or, you know, actually it's not fear, it's time. We just don't have enough time really. We don't think about what we're doing in curriculum design, activity design, as much as we should, because we don't have the time, because everyone's teaching loads are becoming heavier and heavier. We don't take enough time institutionally to say, you know what, every year we are going to have a review of our modules or our courses, whatever you might call them, and we're going to look at that and see what's working, and actually let's try things. So I think that there's a whole combination of things there, but I think that yeah, we need to be able to have a way to start having the conversations about how we can do that. We might not do it with everything, but we can do something.
Chop,
So.
back there, I think you had your hand up.
Hi, just Scott Connor from the University of Highlands and Islands. Just to pick up on the same point in our own institution, a couple of things that restrict us. One is policies, and the policies tend to be quite restrictive, and because the policies are restrictive, we know that there's good practice going on in the institution, but the problem arises if you say you're doing a certain kind of practice that goes against a policy, you risk your practice being removed. So in effect, it's stifling innovation in the institution just by having the policies and being too strict on the policies.
I think that's, sorry Bill, but I think academic development units can play quite a central role there, because they are, well, quite often involved in policy development as well, so actually maybe starting from that can help. Won't all the time, I know, but anyway.
A quick, very, very quick response to both those points. If you're thinking about students, one thing that always helps me is to ask yourself and ask them, where do they get their ideas about beliefs from and so forth, and then just have that conversation. Do you get your ideas entirely from careers masters and mistresses at school, or from the careers unit at the university, or wherever? Where is the space for people to think for themselves? And get that going. I think if that could be instantiated, a word I learned from Keith, if that could be instantiated in practice, then you might start finding students had all sorts of ideas. We all know that climate change is a big issue. A few weeks ago around the world, thousands and thousands of school kids just went out, and we saw a good example. You know, if you want me to stop being an activist, stop being a shite, I think was what the Australian 12-year-olds were saying. So do think about that. When we talk about students as people and humans, we mean it. And humans and people are distinguished from each other and from the stones and the trees and so forth, because they have to think. So, cognitive.
Okay, we're going to have to call a stop there. I know some of you may be going on to the next presentation, so thank you to Sheila and Bill and Keith online. So,
thank you all.
Round of applause. So just a reminder, if you're in any of the C buildings, you need to walk. It says 9 minutes on the back of this.
killer sperm, blue and humpback. These are some of the whales of Galway Bay. Come see these beautiful intelligent creatures hire Pigoggy Webster for all of their academic projects. That thing they do with the tail, that's them dancing in happiness at another successful project by Pigoggy Webster. You're not going to need a bigger budget. You're going to need PigoggyWebster.com.